Whether you're a new light or a seasoned vet, I can almost guarantee that you've been at the mercy of LFGing a Destiny activity before. Since this game offers so many things to farm in so many forms, most people don't have teammates to run raids, dungeons, exotic missions, and Vanguard alerts with at all hours of the day. And while the solo experience in Destiny isn't necessarily bad, you're definitely missing out on what makes Destiny truly special without some companions. And yet, many Guardians are still a little daunted by the idea of venturing into the unknown social space of Destiny LFG. If that sounds like you, then this guide was made for you. Whether you have concerns about miking up, doubts surrounding your knowledge, or uncertainties when it comes to dealing with the diverse cast of LFG characters you'll run into, this video is here to serve as an all-encompassing guide to the hopefully soon-to-be familiar world of Destiny 2 LFG. While most of you know me for tier lists or speedrunning, I actually started out getting my Destiny fix from doing LFG raids, much like many others in the endgame space. In fact, out of my nearly 4,000 full raid clears, I would estimate that well over half of those are from my time spent LFGing. Though I haven't LFG'd in a while, I've done a lot of community research to ensure that my sentiments regarding the experience are still accurate and that the fundamentals I will impart today still hold up in the 2026 LFG economy years later. This video will be split up into 5 chapters, each covering a different aspect of the LFG experience. Let's start with the one I probably get the most questions about: prep. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that most people concerned about LFGing are going to be looking to join raids, since other activities are either less difficult or less socially involved. When it comes to raids, one of the most frequent concerns I hear from new players is the classic fear of inadequate knowledge. In LFG runs, this is often a source of tension from both sides: disgruntled veterans dealing with a surprise newbie they didn't plan for, and beginner raiders tiptoeing around an experienced fire team afraid to make a mistake. So how much should you actually know before you join an activity like an LFG raid? To be honest, the biggest difference maker is just caring, so the fact that you're watching this video at all puts you ahead of the curve. But in terms of actual prep, there's a few things you can do to make sure your experience is as smooth as possible. To save the time of all parties involved, the first thing you should do before trying to join a raid post, regardless of listed requirements, is to watch or read a guide. While I understand that not everyone is a visual learner, having some preview of what you're getting yourself into is a lot better than going in blind. Which guide do you choose from? Well, for older raids, I'm going to recommend more recent guides, since times have definitely changed since guides for raids like Last Wish were originally made. For newer raids, almost any guide will do, whether it's made by anyone from Dado to Llama. Even if there are some inaccuracies in the guide, it's not the end of the world, since you're mainly here to A, actually see the raid being done by a player, and B, grasp some of the concepts behind the encounters and their design. You can even look at a written guide if that's more your speed. There are plenty of those on Reddit or more professional game journalist outlets. While you don't need perfect awareness of everything that is going on in a raid or dungeon before you try it for the first time, it can definitely help to watch multiple POVs for certain tricky mechanics. However, not every guide will have different POVs, so a foolproof way of finding them is looking for a speedrun or low-man completion of the activity in question. Usually, teammates will link each other's videos in the description, so you'll be able to sync videos up and figure out exactly what is going on between different players' screens. On top of this, speedruns and low-mans often involve more optimized or alternative methods of completing an activity, meaning they will allow you to test your knowledge of the concept or objectives behind an encounter rather than sticking to a rigid singular interpretation. While these clears don't always follow the same strategies that players will use in LFG runs, they're a good last resort if you want reference footage from experienced players doing a raid. Even for other endgame activities like GM Vanguard alerts, watching more experienced players play through an activity can help you see where you might want to path, take cover, and deal with enemies. In the future, I might gather footage of LFG raids so I can do commentary on them, since I don't think I've seen that kind of content on YouTube before, at least not to the depth that I would like. Destiny's raids and dungeons are filled with objectives and mechanics that you often need to communicate or memorize the location of. While just watching someone interact with them can be helpful, it's also nice to be able to see where all of these can be from a top-down view. Thankfully, Destiny players love making maps, and using these is one of the easiest ways to learn callouts that would otherwise take you multiple runs to get down. For example, Crypt Security, the first encounter of Deepstone Crypt, has 10 different callouts in the basement, from Dark 1 to Dark 5 and Light 1 to Light 5. Since only 4 of these are active per run, you might not get the chance to interact with them all until you've done quite a few runs of DSC. However, looking at a map will tell you where all of them are in advance, and the same can be done for many of the other location-sensitive encounters in Destiny. Armed with all this knowledge, let's get back to that first question from earlier. How much is enough? The truth is, as long as you have a grasp on what the team should be trying to accomplish in each encounter and some semblance of how it's typically done, you should be okay. Role specifics and quirks can be learned through playing. In reality, when it comes to new players, most frustration from other raiders arises due to dishonesty or poor attitude, which we'll cover in later sections of this video. As long as you have the right mindset and you've done some due diligence, you should be good to go. The next question you're probably asking is where? Where do I find people to play with? Well, let's go over the list of common options together. First, we have Bungie Fireteam's LFG, or the app LFG, as people call it. Then we have Fireteam Finder, Bungie's latest creation available straight from the roster tab. If you're on Xbox, that has its own LFG. And finally, there's also Discord servers, which are generally where you'll find the most experienced LFG players. These include D2 LFG or Big LFG, D2 Cord, regional servers like Destiny 2 Brazil, smaller specialized servers like D2 Sanctuary, and friend, clan, or creator servers. If you're new to the scene, that might seem like a lot, and while you can certainly learn by trying, here's what I'm going to recommend. As with many things, as you look for harder activities with a more exclusive player pool, you will end up spending more time finding a group. As a result, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. In fact, I'm going to recommend learning to match the activity to the LFG method. If you just need some simple portal activity done, then a very open pool like Fireteam Finder or Xbox LFG might serve you best, since you can immediately look for people without worrying too much about loadout or skill. On the other hand, for activities requiring a greater degree of commitment from both you and your teammates, I would recommend doing a little more experimentation. The D2 LFG Discord server is probably the best starting choice for English speakers, with region-specific servers for your community being the next best thing if English isn't your preferred language. That said, maybe you find the environment a little hostile, or you're looking to do a specific kind of activity more often. Then you might want to look into smaller, more specialized servers with communities built around specific aims, like being a more relaxed environment or doing farms of a specific activity more often, like raids. While I will still teach you to navigate any sort of LFG environment regardless of these factors, keep in mind that where you LFG plays a big role in what kind of experience you curate for yourself before you even make or join your first post. Now that you've chosen your LFG spot, let's talk about posts and requirements. As a newbie, it can be very confusing reading LFG posts and trying to decode their abbreviations and jargon. Don't fret, most LFG posts are structured pretty much the same way. LFXM, so X being a number, LF1M, LF2M, means looking for a certain number of members. RR/DR or TR means the third-party report site for these respective activities, so raid report for raids is RR, trials report for trials is TR, dungeon report is DR, etc. KWTD means know what to do, meaning the host expects you to not need teaching, so don't join this type of run if you haven't done the activity before, and if you are, be upfront about being new and don't expect to get carried. Chill means nothing too crazy, but doesn't guarantee that the group takes learners. Fresh means started from the beginning of an activity without a checkpoint. CP means checkpoint, so maybe just the boss encounter of a specific activity. No chests means that the group is skipping secret chests on transition sections, which is typical of groups aiming for faster clear times using skips. And finally, ad clear means someone is saying they are just going to be killing enemies and not helping much with mechanics, which is generally frowned upon in the community, and the opposite would be just doing mechanics. Now, you might also see people ask you to DM them for an invite, and that usually means they want someone who will join a voice call and won't just join the activity cluelessly. Be aware that you might be invited to a private server away from the LFG environment you came from, which you might not be comfortable with. For lower intensity activities, people usually won't ask for a voice call, but for more challenging activities like raids, it's pretty typical for people to want Fireteam members on a call. Many LFG Discord servers also offer server voice channels for group play as well, so you may be redirected or linked to a specific channel either in the post or in subsequent communication with the host. Occasionally, you might see some posts that have requirements like a certain number of clears, a seal or flawless completion, or even a contest emblem. While these might seem silly, these runs are usually hosted by people who are trying to avoid the headache of filtering through inexperienced teammates, but this does not always guarantee a smooth run in my experience. That said, this sort of requirement is becoming less common these days from my understanding. Let's talk about what happens after you join a post. First things first, try to make sure everyone in the group can communicate. This doesn't necessarily mean miking up. As long as someone is responsive in Fireteam chat, that's more than good enough. While this is usually up to the host, you can subtly take note of who's not in call or potentially unresponsive. For some hosts, this can be a deal breaker, but if you're not the host, at the very least, it won't be a surprise when someone isn't able to communicate with you during mechanics. Once you've joined the call or Fireteam, the next step is a little vibe check. Once you've done enough LFG runs, you'll come to learn that you can tell a lot about how a run is going to go before it even starts. For example, posts that have softer language and less requirements are more likely to be a more chill experience overall, but are also more likely to attract and be hosted by less experienced players and vice versa. From the jump, you can almost tell what kind of group or host you're going to have just by reading the post and looking at how the poster talks. If you want to dig a little deeper, you can even check the host's past message history, or if you're invited to a private Discord server, you can poke around and see what kinds of people the regulars are. Trust your gut. At this stage, you don't owe anyone anything, and it's always easier to leave earlier rather than later, so if you don't feel comfortable, no one will think less of you for leaving. Another thing you can do while you're waiting around to load into the activity is a teammate check. It always surprises me how many people are unaware of the power of third-party sites for learning a bit about your teammates. Guardian.report is the one I use the most. Simply enter your Bungie name, check off include current Fireteam members, and you can easily see how many raid and dungeon completions everyone has at a glance. Another site I like to use is raidhub.io, a great alternative to the classic raid.report that shows finer detail that you might appreciate. While Guardian Report also has loadout functionality, you can also check what your teammates are using in-game through the roster page. While clear count and loadout aren't necessarily a tell-all, they do give you a preview of how much experience some of your teammates might have, which can help you figure out who you might want to request help from or lend help to. So now you have some idea of what to do, where to LFG, how to join, and who your teammates are. Next, we're going to talk about your kit. When it comes to prep, you don't need to have loadouts tailored to each and every encounter in every raid, but that is certainly something you're welcome to try once you have more experience. The reality is you can get by with just 3 loadouts for pretty much any situation you might run into: DPS, mechanics, and a transition loadout. However, it's also not a bad idea to just have useful weapons like tractor cannon and a lethonym pre-stored in your inventory just in case you need them. Let's start by talking about DPS loadouts, since that one seems to generate the most controversy and complaints when people think about LFGs. For DPS, if you want to keep it simple, find something that will generally work on everything, even though it might not be 100% optimal. This season, that might be something like the new Heavy Sniper, Uncivil Discourse with Lucky Pants, Finality Rocket Pulse, or even something like Whisper with Sniper's Meditation if you're really new. There are a few exceptions where certain bosses strongly favor using specific weapons. Choir 1's Hipfire mode on Crypt Security comes to mind, but you'll come to learn these with time. Make sure you have 3 surges matching your main weapon damage element, try to run high weapons and super stat, and run an armor exotic that makes sense for your class. In Renegades, that would include Curus, Peacekeepers, Nighthawk, Lucky Pants, Boots of the Assembler, Getaway Artist, or Sanguine Alchemy, for example. For mechs, run weapons that you are comfortable shooting objectives, clearing ads, and occasionally nuking mini-bosses with. Every season, there are multiple Flavor of the Month builds for every class, but for mechanics-focused activities like raids and dungeons, I would strongly suggest getting used to Choir 1 due to its excellent ammo economy and ability to handle different enemy types quickly, from red bars to mini-bosses to object-based enemies. As for your armor exotic, anything that has consistent survivability and ad clear for little effort is good. This season, for example, options like Getaway Artist, Skullfort, and Gifted Conviction come to mind. And last but not least, your transition loadout. Though it may seem odd to think about, you can set yourself up for success in the traversal sections between encounters just like any other part of a raid or dungeon. The classic speedrunner loadout for these sections is Gizmo or Mountaintop, Ergo Sum, and an eager edge sword like Sullen Claw or the Slammer. For a typical LFG run, I'd modify this loadout to use the Praxic Blade or Choir 1 with a matching micro missile in the other non-heavy slot. For vertical traversal, you have the micro missile, for horizontal traversal, you have Eager Edge, and for ads that get in your way, the Lightsaber or Choir. On top of this, you can round out your kit with a movement exotic and subclass. On Titan, this would be Lion Rampant and probably Strand for grappling, but you can be on something like Solar or Prismatic if you want more ability ad clear in an enemy dense transition. On Hunter, you're looking for Stompies with Stasis for Shatter Skating, with a preference for a Vortex Sword due to the ability to heavy attack skate without a super. And finally, on Warlock, you're looking for really any exotic on Solar with Heat Rises, so that you can easily float between platforms without fear of falling. Even if you're not interested in learning speedrun tech, understanding even just a little about these movement tools will make traversal sections infinitely easier. We briefly touched on teammate checking using sites like Guardian Report, but we didn't really talk about what teammates you should be watching out for. Let's talk about some warning signs as well as best practices for handling some of these situations. While there are a ton of dynamic personalities you'll meet playing in LFGs, from the guy hot micing while gnawing on some sort of crunchy finger food, to the mom with the constantly audible crying child in the background, I'll assume you'll be able to handle those as you would any other normal human interaction. Instead, what we'll be focusing on are player interactions that you may want some advice on handling if you're unfamiliar. First, we have the clear farmer. If you LFG at all, especially in larger communities, you are very likely to encounter a clear farmer at least once in a while. Farmers are more likely to join or host runs that are marked as having no chests, fresh, KWT, and DM for invite. These are people who spend a lot of time doing full clears of raids or dungeons, often because they really enjoy a specific activity, or in order to achieve a higher number of full clears on tracker sites like Raid Report and Dungeon Report. And yes, with experience can come ego, but we'll talk about how to keep things running smoothly regardless of personalities present in later sections. Clear farmers can be loosely grouped into 2 categories, LFG farmers and what I'll call static group farmers. The former group refers to players who will rack up raid clears by joining many LFG posts, while the latter group often involves much more rigid roles, a more exclusive group of players, private servers, higher expectations, scheduling, and a common understanding that the goal is to farm full clears as efficiently as possible. The reason why I explain this distinction is because LFG farmers are usually much more accommodating when it comes to non-farmers, and you likely won't need to treat the situation any differently, especially if they're not the host of the run. On the other hand, if you get invited to a private server and you're essentially a fill-in for a member of a static group, usually people are much more picky about how you play and what you do. If a private server you are invited to has a join code channel, channels explaining roles, and pingable rules for joining farms, it is more than likely a farm server. So just be aware that you might be asked to do certain roles and encounters in a more strict environment if you choose to participate in the run. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Most players don't get the opportunity to play in a more coordinated environment that involves faster execution, so if you're willing to stick around, you might learn something that you'd otherwise miss out on. Unfortunately, much like how some farmers optimize getting full clears, some players also host teaching, quote-unquote teaching runs, in order to farm Sherpas. Since there is a Sherpa leaderboard on third-party sites like Raid Report, these players will often host boss checkpoints, sometimes full runs, where they don't really teach and just carry people through the raid in order to get a Sherpa. While this isn't necessarily always true, this is just something to be aware of, especially if a post says something like must have 0 clears in its description. The last type of teammate to watch out for is cheaters. Cheaters fall into 2 unofficial categories, limiters and hard cheaters, and in this section we'll talk about how to identify both. Let's start with limiters. If you've been around the community long enough, I'm sure you've heard stories or even experienced what network manipulation looks like in Destiny. According to Bungie TOS, you shouldn't be banned for unintentionally joining a run where someone is using network manipulation or net limiting, but if you would rather be safe than sorry, then I'll provide you with a few telltale signs to look for when LFGing. Limiting is typically used in PvE context to do massive damage to bosses or to bypass certain mechanics. If you ever see someone in their inventory right before damage swapping between 2 loadouts rapidly, and then they come out of it and the boss's health goes down in massive chunks, then they're probably limiting damage. Weapons often used with network manipulation include Duality, Lorentz Driver, Izanagi's Burden, Vigilance Wing, Outbreak Perfected, Icebreaker, and box-breathing snipers. As for mechanics, limiting is most obviously noticeable in certain raid sections as well. In Garden of Salvation, if you see someone unmoving next to a relay but the interact is flashing as if someone is dunking motes, they're almost certainly limiting. You'll also be able to tell on the results/wipe screen since it will tell you if they dunked more than 10 even if they only picked up 10. In Vow of the Disciple, if the cart ever starts moving before abominations are even dead, or clearly 9 knowledge hasn't been deposited and you're still getting pervading darkness as the cart moves away while someone is AFK on it, they are most likely limiting their knowledge dunks. In King's Fall, if someone manages to double dunk by using one brand claimer to steal both brands so both daughters become damageable at once, then they are most certainly limiting, since the desync method of doing this without network manipulation was patched. While the moral distinction between limiting and what people like to call hard cheating isn't exactly a significant one, using an actual cheat client for Destiny provides a lot more capability. This one's a little more obvious to spot. In the LFG runs I've seen with hard cheaters, people will usually insta-kill bosses through their immunity, teleport to different checkpoints, or troll and kill teammates. Destiny 2 cheats have gotten a lot wackier recently, but I'm sure you can tell that a giant guardian flying around with a Roblox model sniper is probably not playing an unmodified version of the game. Hard cheater accounts are usually a lot shorter lived than limiter accounts, so you'll probably see a very low total clear count and maybe a default emblem on the account, with telltale signs being dungeon clears that are under 2 minutes, or especially fast King's Fall clears in the sub 5 minute range, since it's the raid with the biggest difference between normal and cheated runs time-wise. Finally, on a related note, have clips on. You can use Shadowplay, NVIDIA App Instant Replay, OBS Replay Buffer, Metal, Steam Replay, or any other software or service that allows you to capture what's just happened on your screen. While I've never really needed to clip something to report someone, it can be useful to document if someone is trolling or griefing a run that you're in. While I've basically never experienced this myself, there are plenty of examples of hosts kicking someone right before the boss dies in order to deny loot, which is of course against Bungie TOS. Of course, clipping is also great for capturing funny or crazy moments from your time LFGing too, so that's another great reason to have clips enabled. On to our last slide of preparation. So far, we've talked about LFG runs purely from the perspective of joining a host, but what about the other side? What if you want to host a run? While I wouldn't recommend hosting a run right from the get-go if you're new to LFGing, there are a couple reasons why hosting can be better than joining. First, you have a greater degree of control over the run, meaning you can curate where and who you play with. The atmosphere is almost always set by the host, including the pace of the run and what strats are being used. While it can be more effort looking for people and screening or talking to people when they join can be socially draining, for some activities you may be the only host active, especially depending on the game's popularity, when you LFG, or what kind of activity you pick. Now that we're done with prep, it's time to address the second elephant in the room, engagement, and by extension, communication. I mentioned earlier that if you plan on doing activities like raids and sometimes dungeons, it's pretty common to expect some sort of voice call involvement, whether it's in-game or over something like Discord. There are LFG environments that specifically do not require comm, so if this is completely not your cup of tea, then don't worry too much. However, I will say that if you are looking to get the most out of your LFG experience, whether we're talking about the social aspect, faster runs, or deeper learning, I would recommend having a functioning mic and participating in voice comms if you can manage it. Also, test your audio setup. A lot of people don't know how to access their sound settings in their OS, so make sure everything's all set before joining a call so you don't accidentally use your webcam mic or have your background noise audible. If using a mic is not for you, I still recommend being as communicative as you can manage through Fireteam chat in order to advocate for yourself and participate in the activity. The next tip I have for you is to ask questions. Be inquisitive. I have played with some truly unfriendly and even hateful people, both inside and outside LFG environments, and I cannot name a single one that would respond negatively to someone demonstrating a true willingness to learn and soak up information about whatever activity they're playing. If you're a newer player, not only will this help avoid conflict, but it will also benefit you personally by giving you the opportunity to learn from more experienced players. You can ask about anything, from your performance in your role, to what you should fix in your damage loadout or rotation, to why a mechanic isn't functioning the way you thought it would. In the same vein, always err on the side of over-communicating. It's always going to be better to ask about something if you aren't sure, or to clear something up before the potential wipe rather than after. Excessive or awkward clarification is always going to be preferred over the deafening silence that follows from the failure that occurs when people don't know who's doing what. Chances are, if you're unclear on something that hasn't been established, someone else probably is too. If no one else will break the ice, make a habit of being the one to make sure everyone's on the same page. We already hinted at this on the previous slide, but if your goal is to learn, then you'll have to take some risks and potentially leave your comfort zone. In the context of LFG runs, there are 3 good ways to do this. The first is the simplest: volunteer. If you've done a few runs on ad clear, just getting familiar with the play space, ask to try doing mechanics. Maybe you've only done operator and crypt security and you want to try scanning. Ask. Try to use each time you clear an activity as an opportunity to learn or try something new, whether it be a build, a strategy, or a role in an encounter. Many players settle into the same role every time they do an activity, leading to stagnation in learning and inevitable discomfort when they're asked to play the activity differently. When I was learning raids through LFG, I made it a point to be as productive as possible every time I joined a run. If you really put in the effort to soak up as much knowledge as you can every run, you can easily master most raids in just a couple of clears. This doesn't just include the base mechanics of the activity. Being observant will also help you learn the unspoken rules and unwritten practices of raiding and other endgame activities. You'll learn where players most often make errors, how to recover from mistakes, and what strategies people most prefer. Another great way of learning is by shadowing someone else doing a role you want to learn. If you're not yet comfortable doing something in a raid, you can ask someone to stream or clip what they're doing in the encounter so you can watch, or you can literally watch them in-game. These days, a lot of POVs and clips of endgame raiding strats get posted to YouTube, but a couple years back, this was a great way of learning. I have a couple clips I still have saved in my PC from back when I asked more experienced players to record something for me to learn from. And last but not least, finding mentors is also an excellent way of learning about any activity in Destiny. If you run into someone a couple times in LFG and they seem like a good player to learn with, reach out and add them. Almost every friendship in Destiny is formed through LFGs or mutual groups, and it's the perfect place to find like-minded individuals to do raids or literally anything else with. On top of this, any experienced raider will tell you that LFGing with 1 or 2 other people can make things infinitely more smooth. So finding yourself a duo or trio to run with is a great way to improve your LFG experience. We've talked about what you can do to keep yourself engaged, but what about others? While you yourself can volunteer to do mechs, you can't do everything by yourself. There are plenty of shy players who also want to try a new role, so a little light encouragement can go a long way. However, don't volunteer someone into a role. Always suggest or ask in a gentle way. Much like how you can receive knowledge passed down by mentors to you, you too can pass down knowledge and encourage newer players. The LFG ecosystem is largely built on this generational knowledge, so take your place in the chain by paying it forward. And finally, you can help set a more positive tone in whatever run you're participating in, especially if your team is wiping a lot or people aren't talking. Reminding everyone of the goals and keeping everyone focused in an optimistic way can really make the difference when things start to drag, so try your best to not feed into negativity and keep things light. This next section might seem like common sense, but you'd be surprised how often these issues come up in LFG runs. First, know what you're getting into before committing to a group. The source of most conflicts in Destiny, even outside LFG runs, is precisely this: mismatched expectations. When you join a master SE with all challenges and the group doesn't seem experienced, don't expect the run to be an hour. While I'm not saying that there isn't some merit or even some enjoyment to be gotten from an 8-hour LFG challenge marathon, that kind of experience isn't for everyone, and certainly not all the time. We touched on this in a previous section, but another thing that can cause problems is a lack of transparency between teammates. If you don't know something or prefer doing something a certain way, get that out of the way ahead of time. People don't care if you are inexperienced most of the time, but they do care if you misrepresent yourself or your abilities. Be upfront about what you can and can't do in order to avoid potential conflict. While you should try your best to keep an LFG environment smooth, sometimes it's just not enough. Perhaps the team clearly lacks sufficient experience to complete the activity, or maybe things are simply just too negative to work out. Either way, value your own time enough to leave a run when things become too much. Additionally, know your own limits as well. Whether we're talking about your knowledge, how much time you have, or how tired you are, if you feel like you won't be a good teammate, it might be time to stop running for the day. The fourth tenet I want to talk about when it comes to LFG runs is flexibility. This can mean a number of things. For example, different LFG groups will do different encounters differently. Over time, you'll begin to learn multiple strategies that might be used to beat the same encounter. While most encounters only have one primary strategy that the LFG meta has converged on, it's useful to know the alternatives that exist for the encounters that don't. Flexibility doesn't stop there though. By nature, LFG runs are a dynamic environment, which is part of their appeal as well as their challenge. Even after hundreds of clears, you might run into someone one day that does a mechanic or fails spectacularly at doing so in a way you've never seen before. One of the most valuable things I've learned from speedrunning is the ability to see encounters as a series of gates or objectives that need to be completed in order to clear. While many players learn things from a single path strategy perspective first, I think it's very helpful, especially in an uncoordinated environment like an LFG run, to remember that there aren't set roles and strategies that need to be followed perfectly. If one of your teammates falls short on their role in some way, always try to adopt the mindset of trying your best to complete the underlying objectives of the encounter, even if it means doing more than your role typically does. Part of being flexible in encounter strategy also includes your loadout. When you're just starting out, your loadout will naturally be suboptimal for a variety of encounters. While you should always put your best foot forward with the most effective loadout you can manage, especially if you're less familiar with an activity, being open to loadout suggestions from more experienced players can help you gain a better understanding of why certain weapons are the best for different encounters. The next two tips I have regarding flexibility are two sides of the same coin. Despite being a very socially minded game, Destiny definitely has an issue with players striding the balance between aggression and passivity. The key to being a great teammate is being able to navigate a variety of situations by communicating with your teammates through an outcome-focused approach. For example, a great way to start off on the right foot is by suggesting a plan for an encounter and loosely assigning roles ahead of time, even if the plan isn't the most well thought out or optimized. Plenty of players get sucked into trying to aim for a perfect completion with one phase of mechanics completed their way, lacking the ability to recover from a situation gone awry. At the end of the day, you're here to clear the activity, so communicate and play with that in mind. In the same vein, play for consistency. Having an overly complicated and specific strategy can be difficult for others to follow, and is often more time-consuming and overwhelming than a simpler, less optimized strategy. In addition, having your own contingencies prepared for common mishaps can also improve your team's consistency, and will make you a better overall player too. The last aspect of LFG rating I want to cover is respect. Try to remember that these are strangers, and that generally speaking, no one starts out with any reason to flame you or criticize you from the get-go. Additionally, and this is something I stress to people often, while you shouldn't have to conform to a certain standard or behave a certain way to deserve proper treatment in group activities, there are a lot of things you can do to give yourself the best shot at having a positive LFG experience. Maintaining a positive and outcome-focused demeanor can make a big difference when it comes to how people respond to you, and if you find most of your experience is hostile, it might have something to do with how you present yourself. Plenty of experienced LFGers can attest 99% of your interactions in the LFG space will be neutral or positive if you yourself are generally upbeat. As you know, a big source of conflict in LFGs is when an appendage measuring contest begins, when one player tells another player that they're doing something wrong. However, sometimes giving feedback is genuinely warranted, or at least helpful. If someone is struggling or underperforming, learning how to make assertive recommendations without being passive-aggressive is a valuable skill to have. Light suggestions go a long way if you word them right. While I did say that generally no one has a reason to come at you off the jump, plenty of players naturally speak in a passive-aggressive or sometimes even aggressive-aggressive tone. In these situations, especially without knowing the intention of said players, always aim to de-escalate or maintain a neutral tone. When I LFG, I always keep in the back of my mind that while I am playing with strangers, I am also playing with human beings. I don't know what kind of situation they've been in or what experiences might have informed their behavior in the raid, but I will do my best to approach the situation courteously. And finally, while this might not apply to you now, I advise you to be careful not to fall to the dark side. Over time, you'll learn more and more about raids, dungeons, and other activities. For some players, this knowledge morphs them into jaded, bitter, or cocky players. While gaining experience is important and there's nothing wrong with being proud to share your knowledge, never put others down in the process of doing so. The process of learning and sharing never stops, so don't lose sight of what makes Destiny's social space truly unique by growing an ego. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking it out. Let's go over a brief summary of everything we've talked about. In essence, be prepared. Watch or read guides, prep loadouts, and find the LFG spot that's right for you. Once you're there, make sure the run suits you and have fun. Be engaged, talk to your teammates, ask questions, and be eager to learn more. Be reasonable. Keep things transparent with your team, make sure everyone's on the same page, and don't forget to take care of yourself too. Be flexible. When the run doesn't go the way you expect, react instead of collapsing. Things don't have to go perfectly for you to clear. And finally, be respectful. Remember the people behind the screens and always try to de-escalate to keep things smooth. That's pretty much it. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two. I know Destiny's LFG scene is at one of its lowest points, but I really wanted to release this guide as a one-off that will last through the game's future eras. Let me know if you have any questions, stories, or feedback in the comments, and thanks for watching.